Hi, folks. So, welcome to Nikos Biography. This is my blogography, maybe. Not sure what to call it, really. It's a personal blog, and I thought it was a good time to do it, really, just to look back while I've had so much time recently at home. I've been at home a lot recently, the last 4 months, especially been housebound, really, at home a lot of the time, just because of this illness that I've got. And it's an infection that affects my neck and also my head. And it's a meningeal infection, so it affects the meninges around, causes me headaches on either side and the back of the head. Affects my eyes and nose when I get the inflammation. So it's been getting overwhelming and quite hard recently, the sheer amount of symptoms of it, really. Just because the infection has spread. About a year and a few months ago, the infection spread to the lower part of the body, down the pelvic region, when it became a viral pleurisy. So I worked for a couple of years with it. Up until then, I've now had the infection for just over 3 years. And as I say, just over a year ago, it spread to the lower parts. So I'm getting lower body pains and aches down there. I feel quite uncomfortable, really, down there. I'm trying to get a comfortable position a lot of the time. In fact, I spend a lot of my time really just trying to keep myself restrained and just have to restrict my position, the posture that I'm in, just to sort of somehow adapt to cope with all the different pains, just because they're in multiple different parts of the body, really, because it's affecting the lower part of the body as well as the lungs. The neck is always in pain, really, and when I get the inflammation at the back of the head, where it joins to the neck, it hurts really badly then, and that accompanies bad headaches, and I get this eye strain and all this mucus that sort of blocks all around the membranes, and it really, it's like it's pushing out and becoming really inflamed, like there's something under the skin, all the excessive mucus, and it just pours out of the nose. The whole nose becomes squelchy and blocked up. Every day I will get the inflammation for a couple of hours where it gets bad. So I mentioned the illness because that's the current situation I'm living with, and I apologise if that interrupts any of the recording or me trying to tell the biography or my own story. I will try and speak as clearly and as slowly as possible, just for clarity's sake. My real idea, the desire and reason for wanting to do a personal story, I have some record of it, just to leave behind some personal thoughts, really, of my own story. It's really just for others as well as myself, really. I suppose because the illness has advanced so much, because I've been that ill and unable to contact others so much, at home so much of the time, therefore, because I'm in a lot of pain and the illness has advanced, and I don't know what kind of infection it is or what will happen with it. I just don't know. I never knew that it would progress this much, actually, and I'm worried with how far the disease could progress. I don't know whether I'll get better with it or not. And not knowing that, I suppose it would be nice just to have some sort of record or leave something behind if others want to find out anything about me or to know about, some of my life and some of my history, some of what makes me who I am, what led to me being in the situation I'm in, how did I live my life, just for a few friends and family. For others, because I may not be able to make and record this so well later, if the illness progresses or if I'm not in a position that I'm able to. Also for my own sake as well, just so that I can compose my own thoughts. It's something I feel that I've done a lot of in my thoughts, thinking about it over the last few months when I've had to be alone for so long. It's been good for that in one sense, but I feel it would be more helpful to have a sort of a composed thoughts that are more structured and more orderly. I tend to sort of randomly just visit a scattering of all different thoughts from different eras and different decades and different times, without really any kind of clear order to it sometimes. Looking at different relationships and then looking at different jobs and then that are years apart, or just being triggered off by emotions and then going off to revisit old memories. I randomly just, or as the circumstances dictate, I just go off and look at. I do remember and spend a lot of time alone now, remembering recalling all sorts of different fascinating and funny and strange and bizarre occurrences in my life, and reevaluating the relationships I've had, the different people I loved and cared for, the mistakes that I made, the things I feel glad for and feel blessed for sharing, the things I feel grateful and a sense of awe about sometimes, the things I still have doubts and unsure about as well. There's lots of reasons to revisit memories. Um, discovering awful things I've done and said, and I didn't realize the effect that it had on others until I had more time to think about it. I didn't realize how happy I was, or how shocking some things were, or sad, or how funny some things were when I could laugh about it years later, and not always at the time. How much funnier things can be when the serious situation you're in has moved on or been resolved, or just isn't as important as it once was. Oh, I found a lot of funnier, humorous anecdotes and things that make me laugh too. Funny relationships, funny jobs, lots of funny occurrences, things I witnessed and experienced, things I did, in my clumsy nature as well. I'm not sure if other people would laugh with me or at me. Both would be okay as well, though. There's lots of funny memories as well as happy memories as well. There are sad memories as well, especially recently losing mum and the grief of losing other friends. There were other very sad things that have happened, and other people's illnesses and suffering, and watching people go through all sorts of hardships. My memories are just full of overwhelmingly emotional issues I discovered, really, but I wanted to compose them in a more structured way. So my attempt is to try and do a more biographic, chronologically structured blog, really, just to put it in a chronological order, rather than just me visiting any kind of memory from any decade, any year, any relationship, any school or any job or any place, any protest that I went on, or any party or any traveling, any country that I happened to visit, just randomly visiting anything according to whatever the particular need at the time drives me to do, but without any really overall kind of order, or without being able to sort of look back and oversee what was my life about, to sort of see how did the different jobs, how did the different relationships, how did the different homestays and the different families that adopted me or that I adopted too, and how did they all relate to me? How did I relate to them? And how do we all relate to, the changing circumstances? So I suppose it's a small glimpse for me, albeit subjective, into a much wider societal history as well. I suppose all I have to rely on in one way. So for me alone, I suppose it's useful, I felt, to try and compose some sort of more orderly thoughts, so I can sort of look back and see chronologically how things connect over time. So therefore, I want to start the story, if possible, at the beginning, and then work from there to the present, to the current situation where I'm up to now. So that's the goal, really, with the personal blog, the autobiography, as it's more generally called. People always used to write those, didn't they? Write their memoirs. I guess if people got critically ill or felt they were getting too ill and not functioning as well. So it happens this sometimes, where I feel something inside my neck and inside the muscles that is kind of really inflaming and getting like I feel something in there, pressure in there of some sort. So if I have to sort of break up the actual the video recordings of it, well, I will have to anyway because of the length of it. But if the illness gets bad or I feel like I'm struggling too much, I'll just break and carry it on into another video and then pick up where I left off. And that's hopefully the goal, really. Because sometimes it's a struggle talking at length. But I am able to do it sometimes when the pain and the inflammation is not so bad. Right now it's okay. But I sometimes have to take a lot of deep breaths as well. So yes, the goal is to have a more ordered, structured kind of chronological order, just to make it more easier to sort of look into, really. And I wanted to look at the more things that are relevant still to the current life, to what I'm living, that could be relevant to me and to a few others, really, I suppose. Yeah, my goal is to really follow Grice's maxims, really, to try and be as sensitive as possible, really, as well as also being relevant, to having some coherent structure to it, um, so that I, can rely on it if I need to, and maybe a few other people can as well, if it's useful to try and compose your thoughts and your feelings on it. But it's also about trying to be as sensitive as well, not just my own feelings too, but to others as well. I forgot the third maxim there, didn't I? That of being honest and trying to be true. Trying to be true to my own actual real feelings about a situation, what I really felt about it. That does involve being sensitive as well to the other people that I'll be talking about. Obviously, all of our biologies, our biographies, even. Well, yes, both our biologies and biographies, they all relate to each other. Physiologically, we all have similarities to each other. Whatever differences in our body, in our neurological structure, in our abilities and our disabilities, whatever differences there are, we have many more physiological similarities. We have a lot of biological similarities as well as biographical as well, metaphysical or ideological. We have a lot of overlap with others, of course. We all live in the same world, at least, I think we do. We live in the same physical world, don't we? Under the same weather, the same elements. We live in the same societies, different ones sometimes, but we share and overlap in the same societies. We're all dependent on eating food, drinking water. We all need medicine when we hurt. We all suffer and we all have joy. We all cry and we all laugh. So we all have a lot of shared biographical things in the past. I want to be as sensitive to others as possible, as well as myself. And that means trying to be as honest about what actually happens and only using things that are relevant that I feel, and trying to really give an authentic portrayal of what happened in my life, of what happened in my story, and what's most relevant. And I will try and be factual about that and only be relevant. There's no point in using all the trivial details, but if I think something has got some relevance, shows some bearing on my character, shows some sort of something that is important about society or about others, or what forms important relationships in my life. Relationships with other group, with companies, with people that I work for, lived with, had relationships with, whether those are parental relationships, childhood friends or acquaintances, or even more closer, intimate relationships, romantic partners, or just, brotherly friendships. Different anecdotes and stories that I'll try and be factual on that had some personal insight into actually what makes the relationship of whatever nature, what it is. And of course, I've got to try and be sensitive, but also being as accurate as I can be, really, as factual, and just saying what's relevant. And I think in accordance to what makes the relationship, the essence of it. And that's really my goal, I suppose, really. So that's a kind of a goal for the blog itself, for the biography. I struggled to say it. I have a really dry throat. That's an introduction to what it will be, or the intentions of what it will be anyway. Just to tell a biographical story, a short summary with a few anecdotes that kind of give supporting evidence just to show, how I was in my relationships, what the relationships were, how they were developing, and in what way, in what context, in what situation, and how it affected me and how it's affected others. My belief in my philosophy, I suppose, at the moment is that everything is connected somehow. But we don't know about all the different connections in life because of the sheer overwhelming amount and the number of them, even the small trivial things, even the thousands of people that we see, the tens of thousands that will have some small casual passing relation to, the conveyor belt of customers that we might serve, working years in customer service job or something, for example. The hundreds of different people that we might see working as a home care assistant, for example, that we might just see in passing for a few hours. The tens of thousands more that will pass by in a crowd, in a festival, in a shopping centre. Those that will just exchange a greeting with, a hi, a nod, a frown, a casual joke, and so on. And then the hundreds of people that will make closer contact, that will be a little acquainted with, that will have shared a blog, a tweet, a text with online, a picture, a passing meme, a funny reaction, an argument, a comment of whatever nature, that we might have met in passing, but briefly, of the very, very casual acquaintance, the thousands of those that we might meet over decades, and then working the way up the personalised sort of pyramid, as it were, the less relationships that there are that are family, friendship relationships, or still acquaintances perhaps, but more closer acquaintances. And there could be hundreds of those that can vary on an extent, of course. There seems to be no absolute cutoff point between what is a stranger and what is an acquaintance, or what is an acquaintance and what's a friend. There seems to be all these different shades of grey, really, between someone totally estranged and totally, completely familiar. Well, no one ever perhaps is totally estranged unless somebody lives in a completely other world, has a completely different physiology and psychology and sociology, but no one lives entirely divorced. There's usually some similarities, even if there's many more differences. And in that sense, no one is totally familiar and has exactly the same situation and biology and psychological profile and neurological structure, as well as mental and physical abilities. No one has exactly those. However similar and overwhelmingly similar they might be sometimes, and no one can absolutely know all of someone else's physical, mental, social, intellectual, and any other abilities too, and their circumstances. No one is totally, absolutely familiar with absolutely everything with someone else. Perhaps we're not even totally familiar with our own, and we're always learning about ourselves. So we're not perhaps totally familiar with ourselves, nor totally estranged, thankfully, either. But I see it as shades of grey, really. That's how I see it, I suppose. So if I talk in those terms, and I try to use that language to reflect that belief of the shades of grey that I believe. Just that I believe that we can't clearly define and put people easily into sort of these categorical boxes. It's not so easy that we can easily know absolutely and define clearly what our relationships are, either with ourselves or with others. We can't clearly say black or white, it's this or that, it's estranged or it's family. We can't clearly say one or the other. There are all these different subtle shades of grey between them. And then between the quite different things, there are more contrastive, very different, more clearer differences. Like an acquaintance or casual acquaintance is quite more different than a familial friend, someone that's much closer. So I see all these subtle sort of differences that relationships can change themselves, moving between and along, and progressing and becoming more familiar, or even becoming more estranged as well. Things don't gradually just go one way or the other. I think there are estranged relations, but I think there are casually estranged relations that are only known a little, and there are those that are acquaintances, an old-fashioned word, but it just means you know someone a little acquainted. When you've met a stranger briefly, I suppose you are casually acquainted, but that's different from a friendlier acquaintance. To distinguish between the two, a friend, of course, is someone that you know relatively well. And I would say family, when I talk about that, I don't necessarily imply or mean a biological family necessarily. It could also be just a friend that's become familiar, to use the word in a different sense. A familiar acquaintance even. Acquaintance or friend that can become, the relationship can progress into becoming more familiar, more well-known to each other. So when I talk about family in that sense, I suppose I talk about something that's just simply familial, something that's more well-known, really, for better or worse. Because you do tend to argue as well as being able to counsel and to care for and to look after, nourish each other. Sometimes we can also hurt, and so it's for those reasons that I'm reminded to be more sensitive, and especially when talking about others, when I'm more familiar with the good and bad within our relationship. Sometimes, if I've studied it and I feel I really know it well enough, if I do, whatever the nature of the relationship, whether it's still estranged or always was, or whether it's become more an acquainted relationship, or one that I'm familiar with, a family relation, or whether it's a friendly family relation or family relation, whatever the nature of it, or an estranged family relation. There's so many multiple different types of relationships. Acquaintance, family, whatever it is, though, I think the goal is to try and just be only to talk about it as relevantly as possible, to talk about it sensitively, considering others as well as myself, but also just to be honest about it as well. And I think that's a difficult challenge in itself, really. It's hard to sort of remember three things for me, actually. I can be focused on doing one thing, like what actually did happen historically, or especially on something so long ago, when my memories, like anyone's, can be infallible, and I'm trying to sort of piece together different things from different eras. It's trying to work out, yes, what actually did happen sometimes, or what of the historical facts are relevant and not just trivial details, but what actually do provide some insight, some evidence to show that this is the situation that was going on at the time. And these were the effects that it had. Just remembering the historical details from long ago, that's a challenge in itself. I will also try and be focused on just putting together the relevant ones of those. Yeah, and I will try and be sensitive doing that as well. But of course it does, and it can sometimes stir up emotional feelings as well. I suppose it could do in me or others, so I'm aware of that. And I want to go into it being conscious of that, and to be as sensitive as possible. But also to be honest when needed to be as well. So it's trying to sort of balance that being honesty, that need for honesty, if there is one, with also being sensitive also to how it could affect others, as well as me too. I've got to sort of decide that if I feel it's necessary, then it's something I'll do, but I will do it sensitively. So there, I wanted to give an explanation first before I sort of launched into the actual biography itself. And I thought it would be useful just to give my reasons just for going into it, really. No, I think, yep, that's pretty much the summary of the introduction to the biography.